Hey there, Cryptid family. If you enjoy the chills, don't forget to like this video, subscribe if you're new, and hit that notification bell if you're not afraid of the whispers. Welcome to the end. You've been drafted. Congratulations, you've officially outlived civilization. The world as you knew it is gone, burned, flooded, nuked, or possibly just left to rot under the weight of its own stupidity. Whatever the cause, here you are, standing among the wreckage, wondering what the hell happens next. Maybe you had a life before this, dreams, goals, a 5-year plan that involved something other than scavenging for canned beans and avoiding roving bands of lunatics. Well, bad news. Those plans are as dead as whatever's shambling toward you in the distance. The good news? You now have a brand new career, handpicked by some self-declared warlord who thinks forming themed survival factions is the next big thing. That's right. Whether you signed up or not, you've been drafted. Maybe you're a scavenger, doomed to spend your days digging through the rubble for slightly less expired food. Maybe you're one of the poor suckers, stuck as frontline muscle for your faction, which mostly means getting shot at while your leader delivers long-winded speeches about dominance. Or God help you, maybe you're the food tester, which is just a fancy way of saying disposable. Regardless of your new role, your only real job is simple. Don't die. But survival isn't as easy as stockpiling supplies and hoping for the best. The apocalypse is an unpredictable nightmare filled with dangers beyond just starvation and mutant wildlife. Your biggest threat? Other survivors. Factions are forming, leaders are rising and falling, and betrayals are more common than clean drinking water. You'll need more than just brute strength or quick reflexes to make it. You'll need strategy, common sense, and an excellent ability to pretend you know what you're doing at all times. That's where this guide comes in. I've compiled the best survival strategies for dealing with the insanity that is post-civilization life. Whether it's dodging recruitment into a death cult, avoiding becoming someone's dinner, or just figuring out how to look too important to kill, these tips will keep you ahead of the competition. Just remember, in a world where the rules are dead, the only rule that matters is survival. So, take a deep breath if the air isn't toxic. Grab whatever weapon you haven't already lost, and let's get started. The apocalypse isn't waiting, and neither are the maniacs who just spotted you from across the street. Tip 1. If you're in the food tester group, run. Every faction needs a way to determine what's edible and what turns people into screaming puddles of radioactive sludge. If you've been assigned this job, congratulations. You're officially disposable. There's no sugarcoating it. Being a food tester is about as prestigious as being the guy who checks if a bear trap is still functional by stepping in it. The moment they hand you a suspiciously glowing can of mystery meat and tell you to take a bite, you need to make some quick life decisions. And by quick, I mean run. The logic behind a food tester is simple. Someone has to be the guinea pig, whether it's expired rations, unknown berries, or a fresh source of meat that no one wants to talk about. Factions aren't known for their ethical testing methods. Most of the time, the job is assigned to newcomers, people who look particularly gullible, or anyone who ask too many questions about what happened to the last guy in their role. You won't get a fancy title or a raise for your service, just a lot of nervous side eyes from people waiting to see if you start foaming at the mouth. Some might argue that being a food tester isn't all bad. Maybe you're lucky enough to be in a faction that actually values its members and wouldn't deliberately poison you for fun. Maybe their testing process is more about caution than outright murder. If that's the case, great. But let's be honest. If you're holding this guide, odds are your faction isn't exactly the compassionate type. More likely, they see you as an expendable asset, which means your lifespan is directly tied to how many questionable meals you can survive. Spoiler, it won't be many. So what's your escape plan? First, always keep a backup excuse. Develop a sudden, rare stomach condition that makes you unfit for food testing. Fake a religious belief that forbids you from consuming anything harvested under a blood moon. Trust me, no one will question it. If all else fails, sabotage the next batch of food by mixing in random toxic plants. If they can't trust the results, they'll abandon the process altogether. Whatever you do, don't just accept your fate. The only thing worse than being a food tester is being the previous food tester. In the apocalypse, your value isn't just about what you can do. It's about convincing others you're too important to waste. The best way to survive is to make yourself indispensable. And if that doesn't work, find the fastest route out of there and take your chances with the Wasteland. At least the wildlife won't force you to taste test your own demise. Tip 2. Avoid the skull motif faction. They're overcompensating. Every apocalypse has one, a warlord who believes that intimidation is best expressed through an excessive amount of skulls. Their banners are covered in them, their armor is fashioned from them, and their throne is probably an uncomfortable pile of human remains. They and their goons strut around in matching leather jackets, grinning like they just walked out of a bad heavy metal album cover. On the surface, they seem like the biggest threat in the Wasteland. But let's be real, if they were actually competent, they wouldn't need all the theatrics. The truth about these factions is simple. They're compensating. A real warlord doesn't need to constantly remind you how scary they are. The guys who do, they're usually propped up by sheer bravado and a bunch of followers too dumb to realize their leader has the tactical mind of a rabid raccoon. They prioritize looking menacing over having actual resources, and their entire strategy hinges on hoping people are too afraid to challenge them. It's all show and no substance, like a roided out peacock with a murder fetish. Now, you might be tempted to join them. After all, they look powerful, and in a world where most people are struggling just to survive, rolling with the toughest gang seems like a good idea. But here's the problem. These guys are the first to get wiped out. Every apocalypse eventually has a power struggle, and the warlord with the skull obsession is always on someone's hit list. Maybe another faction decides they've had enough of the posturing. Maybe their own people realize that wearing human bones doesn't actually put food on the table. Either way, their reign of terror has an expiration date, and you do not want to be standing next to them when it arrives. The safest bet is to keep your distance. If you must interact with them, act impressed, but not too eager. These types love being feared, but they get paranoid fast. Never let them see you as a potential threat, but also never make yourself too useful. Being their right-hand man might seem appealing until you realize that right-hand man translates to first person sacrificed. When things go south, if you find yourself cornered into joining, start looking for an exit plan immediately. These factions don't last, and when they go down, they take everyone with them. At the end of the day, survival is about playing smart, not playing scary. Let the idiots paint themselves in blood and scream about domination. You'll be the one still alive when their fortress inevitably collapses under the weight of its own poor leadership. And if you ever need a quick distraction, just point out that their skull throne is probably a chiropractor's nightmare. That should buy you a head start. Tip 3, build alliances, but trust no one. The apocalypse is not a solo endeavor. Sure, you might think you can survive alone, living off canned beans and your own paranoia, but at some point, you're going to need help. Maybe you'll need backup in a fight, someone to watch your back while you sleep, or a mechanic who can turn that pile of scrap into something that runs. Strength in numbers is a real thing, and having a crew can be the difference between thriving and becoming a cautionary tale. That being said, trusting people is a fast track to disappointment or death. The apocalypse didn't just kill off modern luxuries, it also hit the concept of loyalty with a sledgehammer. Everyone is looking out for themselves, and the second they think you're more valuable as a resource than as a person, you'll find yourself abandoned, betrayed, or conveniently lost. During a supply run, alliances are necessary, but blind trust, that's for suckers. So how do you balance the two? First, always keep a few secrets. Never reveal the full extent of your supplies, your skills, or your contingency plans. If someone knows everything about you, they know exactly how to screw you over. Second, watch how people act when things go south. Anyone can be friendly when food is on the table and the sun is shining, but the moment resources run low or a threat appears, that's when their true nature shows. The guy who's cracking jokes today might be the same guy who'll push you into a zombie-infested alley tomorrow just to buy himself some extra time. Also, be strategic about who you align with. The charming, silver-tongued leader, probably a manipulator. The quiet one, who doesn't talk much, either a complete psychopath or the most reliable person in the group. Flip a coin. The guy who insists, "You can trust me, I swear," is the last person you should trust. And if someone goes out of their way to be extra nice to you, ask yourself, do they actually like me? Or are they just waiting for the right moment to stab me in my sleep? Because history leans heavily toward option 2. At the end of the day, the best way to survive alliances is to never forget that they are temporary. People will come and go, loyalty will shift, and the only constant in the apocalypse is that everyone wants to live, sometimes at your expense. So build connections, use them wisely, and always have a backup plan in case those smiling faces decide you look better as a corpse than a companion. Tip 4. Never volunteer for special missions. Every faction, no matter how big or small, eventually needs something done that no one wants to do. Maybe it's scouting an abandoned bunker, retrieving a valuable package from deep inside mutant territory, or seeing if that supposedly safe drinking water is actually laced with radiation. These are what leaders call special missions, but don't let the name fool you. It's just a fancy way of saying suicide run. The trick is, they won't ask you directly. No, they'll dangle it in front of the group like it's some great honor. We need volunteers, they'll say, like they're giving you a choice. If you're new to the apocalypse and still clinging to your old world sense of duty, you might step forward, thinking it'll earn you respect. It won't. The only thing it'll earn you is a memorial made out of whatever scraps they can scrounge up after your inevitable demise. You see, there's a reason these missions need volunteers. If it were truly safe, the leader would send their trusted men. If it were important, they'd go themselves. But when something is just dangerous enough that no one wants to be held accountable for sending you to your death, that's when they start looking for volunteers. And once you're in, backing out is harder than you think. So, how do you avoid getting roped into one of these death marches? First, don't stand near the front of the group when they make the announcement. The closer you are to the front, the more pressure you'll feel to accept. Second, look busy. Nothing gets you assigned to a horrible mission faster than looking like you have nothing else to do. Carry a clipboard, scribble notes, pretend to be checking supplies, whatever it takes to look too essential to send away. Third, if someone tries to guilt trip you into it, immediately point out another person who would be way better suited for the job. Redirect the heat before it lands on you. If all else fails, fake an injury. No one sends the guy with a sprained ankle or a bad stomach on a high-risk mission. Overdo it a little if you have to. Crawl, groan, clutch your side dramatically. People would rather find another sucker than deal with someone who might slow them down. Remember, in the apocalypse, volunteering is for suckers. The only people who survive these missions are the ones smart enough to never sign up in the first place. Let someone else be the hero. You've got better things to do, like staying alive. Tip 5. The best weapon is the one you can actually use. The apocalypse has a way of turning everyone into a wannabe action hero. The moment civilization collapses, people start thinking they need to carry around the biggest, most intimidating weapon possible. You'll see scrawny guys hauling around broadswords they can barely lift, scavengers clinging to rusted-out flamethrowers with no fuel, and some poor fool trying to wield a crossbow, even though they've never used anything more complicated than a toaster. It's all fun and games until someone gets themselves killed because they couldn't reload in time. Here's the thing. Looking badass and being effective are two very different things. A weapon is only as good as your ability to use it under pressure. In a fight, you don't have time to fumble with complicated reload mechanisms or realize, oh crap, this thing is heavier than I thought, while someone or something is actively trying to kill you. You need something that works for you, not something that looks cool strapped to your back. So, what's the right weapon? That depends on what you can actually handle. If you're good with a knife, stick with that. If you can reliably aim a pistol, great. If you insist on swinging around a sword, make sure you can at least lift it without throwing out your shoulder. The key is consistency. When the time comes, you need to be able to attack, defend, or run without hesitation. Because hesitation, that's just an invitation to die dramatically. Another thing to consider, maintenance. A gun with no bullets is just an expensive club. A bow with no arrows is modern art. A baseball bat, on the other hand, no moving parts, no ammo to worry about, and perfect for sending threats flying across the room. Whatever you choose, make sure you can actually maintain it. A weapon you can't fix or reload is just dead weight. And in the apocalypse, dead weight gets left behind. At the end of the day, survival isn't about what looks impressive. It's about what works. The guy with the custom gold-plated shotgun that jams every other shot, he's not making it. The person with the plain, reliable crowbar who knows exactly how to use it, they'll be the last one standing. Choose wisely and make sure that when the time comes, your weapon doesn't turn you into an easy target. Tip 6. If the faction leader calls themselves Supreme, find a new faction. The apocalypse has a way of inflating egos. With governments gone and society reduced to rubble, there's nothing stopping the most unhinged survivors from declaring themselves the next great ruler of the Wasteland. And while some factions manage to keep things somewhat democratic, others are led by people who take themselves way too seriously. If your leader insists on being called Supreme Overlord, Dread King, or anything with grand in the title, congratulations. You've joined a cult, not a survival group. Titles like these are never a good sign. A competent leader doesn't need to dress themselves up in theatrical nonsense. They lead because they're strong, smart, or at least not actively trying to get everyone killed. But the ones who slap Supreme in front of their name, they're compensating for something, usually a complete lack of leadership skills. Instead of focusing on things like food, safety, and actual survival, they're busy making grand speeches about destiny, while their followers slowly starve to death. Now you might be thinking, but what if they actually have a strong, well-organized faction? And sure, some of these warlords manage to keep things together for a while. But power-hungry leaders don't build for the long term. They rule through fear, manipulation, and an unhealthy obsession with forcing people to chant their name. These kinds of factions eventually implode, either because of infighting, a coup, or the inevitable moment when their fearless leader decides human sacrifices are the key to survival. The best way to handle this situation? Leave. Quietly. The second you start hearing phrases like, our glorious reign will last forever, or only the weak question my rule. Start packing your things. You don't want to be around when their paranoia sets in, because, spoiler alert, every self-declared ruler eventually turns on their own people. And when they do, their so-called loyal subjects are the first ones lined up for execution, or worse, forced to participate in whatever unhinged experiment they've convinced themselves is necessary for the greater good. In the apocalypse, survival is about choosing your battles. Don't waste your time serving under someone whose only talent is making their followers shout, "Long live the Supreme Commander." If a leader needs excessive titles and constant worship to feel important, they're not leading. They're playing dictator. And you don't want to be around when their empire inevitably crumbles. Because trust me, it will crumble. And when it does, you do not want to be standing next to them when the knives come out. Tip 7. Don't get attached to a safe zone. If you've survived this long, chances are you've stumbled across at least one so-called safe zone. Maybe it's a fortified settlement, a hidden bunker, or some makeshift camp run by survivors who swear it's the last bastion of hope. And for a while, it might actually seem like a good place to stay. There's food, shelter, maybe even something resembling order. You start to think, hey, maybe I don't have to keep running anymore. Big mistake. Nothing stays safe forever. If history has taught us anything, it's that the second a place starts feeling too comfortable, disaster is right around the corner. Maybe a rival faction raids the place. Maybe someone gets sloppy and lets a horde in. Maybe the leader makes one bad call that turns the whole thing into a battlefield. Doesn't matter how well fortified or well managed it seems, every safe zone will fall eventually. The only question is when. Now, I'm not saying you should avoid these places entirely. A temporary haven is still better than sleeping in a ditch. And if you can rest up, resupply, and gather information before moving on, great. Just don't unpack your bags. The moment you start calling it home, you're sealing your own fate. Safe zones breed complacency, and complacency is what gets people killed. When things go wrong, and they will, the ones who get out are the ones who always had an exit plan. The ones who stayed too long, they're either part of the body count or the next cautionary tale. The smart move: treat every safe zone like a pit stop, not a destination. Always have an escape route. Never trust the walls to hold, and never let yourself believe you're truly safe. The second you start thinking, this place could last forever, you might as well start digging your own grave. Because nothing in the apocalypse lasts forever, especially not the places that promise they will. Tip 8. Watch out for the too friendly survivors. In a world where backstabbing is more common than clean water, anyone who is too nice should immediately raise a red flag. If someone greets you with a warm smile, offers you food, and insists they're just so happy to see another survivor, you should be asking yourself one question: what's their angle? Because trust me, they have one. Let's break it down. The apocalypse doesn't breed generosity. The people who last are the ones who've learned to be cautious, hardened, and just paranoid enough to avoid getting tricked. So when someone is excessively welcoming, either they're so naive they won't last another week, or, more likely, they're setting you up. There are plenty of reasons someone might be rolling out the red carpet for you, and none of them are good. First, they could be part of a death cult. Yes, those still exist, and they're thriving in the New World Order. These people love to lure in unsuspecting survivors with the promise of food and shelter, only to reveal, whoops, you're actually their next sacrifice. If you walk into a community and see a little too much religious imagery, hear a lot of talk about the chosen, or notice that everyone's wearing the same creepy smile, run. Second, they could be cannibals, let's be honest. When society collapses, so do a lot of moral boundaries. Some groups have decided that if food is scarce, people will do just fine. If they're overly eager to fatten you up, don't take the bait. And if the stew they offer tastes just a little too good, you should be sprinting for the exit before you become the next ingredient. Lastly, they could just be con artists. Some survivors play the long game. They gain your trust, make you feel safe, and then, just when you've let your guard down, bam, you wake up tied to a chair while they loot your gear. These types are especially dangerous because they don't use force, just manipulation. They make you want to trust them, and by the time you realize you shouldn't have, it's too late. So how do you avoid falling for it? First, test their kindness. See how they react when you don't immediately accept their help. If they start getting defensive, irritated, or try to guilt trip you, congratulations, you've just dodged a scam. Second, always observe first. If they're part of a group, watch how the others behave. If everyone seems just a little too identical in their friendliness, something's off. Third, and most importantly, always have an escape plan. If something feels wrong, trust that instinct and get out before you become the latest victim of apocalypse hospitality. Because in this world, the only thing worse than a hostile enemy is a friendly one. Tip 9, learn to look busy. It might save your life. In the apocalypse, the fastest way to get yourself volunteered for a terrible, probably fatal job is to stand around looking useless. If you don't have an obvious role, someone will find one for you, and it won't be something pleasant. You'll be sent on dangerous scouting missions, asked to clean up after the last failed supply run, or worst of all, assigned permanent grunt work. You don't want to be the guy hauling water or digging latrines for the rest of your miserable existence. The trick? Look busy, always. Even when you have nothing to do, make it look like you do. Walk with purpose, carry something heavy, nod seriously while inspecting a wall. Whatever it takes to give the illusion that you are essential. In a world where people are constantly sizing each other up for usefulness, the last thing you want is to be seen as expendable. One of the best props you can have is a clipboard. Nobody questions the guy with a clipboard. You could be staring at a completely blank sheet of paper, but if you furrow your brow and occasionally mutter things like, structural integrity could be a problem, people will assume you have an important job. The same goes for tools. Hold a wrench, a screwdriver, or literally anything that looks technical. If people think you're in charge of keeping the water purifier running or fixing weapons, they won't waste you on grunt work. Another classic trick: carry a map. Every faction needs someone who understands logistics. Even if you have no idea what you're doing, pretending to be the person who plots scavenger routes is a great way to keep yourself out of danger. If anyone questions you, just say, "I'm analyzing potential trade routes. Can't afford to make a mistake." Boom. Now you're too valuable to risk on a supply run. Most importantly, never, never stand still for too long. The moment you're seen loitering, someone will rope you into a job you don't want. The second you hear the words, "Hey, we need someone to," walk away, fast, fake a crisis, pretend you're late for something, or just start running and yell. No time to explain. Whatever it takes to avoid getting stuck with a job that could get you killed. In the Wasteland, survival isn't just about brute strength or combat skills. Sometimes it's about looking just competent enough to avoid being expendable, but not so competent that people start expecting results. Walk that fine line, keep up the act, and you might just live long enough to enjoy whatever counts as a retirement plan in the apocalypse. Tip 10. If you make it this far, keep moving. The second you start thinking you're safe, the universe will prove you wrong. It doesn't matter how many close calls you've survived, how well you've fortified your hideout, or how much food you've stockpiled. Something will come along to ruin it. The apocalypse isn't a one-time event. It's a constantly evolving nightmare. Factions rise and fall, safe zones collapse, and new horrors crawl out of the wasteland every day. The only real survival strategy? Keep moving. A lot of people make the mistake of settling down the moment they find something resembling stability. They build walls, set up gardens, and start calling a place home. And for a while, it works until the next major disaster strikes. Maybe raiders take an interest. Maybe the place runs out of resources. Maybe something far worse moves in, and suddenly, what felt like safety turns into a death trap. If you want to survive long term, you have to think ahead. Mobility is key. Keep your supplies packed, your escape routes planned, and your expectations low. If a place starts to feel too comfortable, start planning your exit strategy. The best survivors aren't the ones who dig in and hope for the best. They're the ones who adapt, the ones who recognize that survival isn't about clinging to one place. It's about staying one step ahead of whatever's coming next. That doesn't mean you should constantly run without direction. Have a goal, even if it's just finding a better place to hide. Stay light, keep your resources manageable, and never carry more than you can run with. If you find a good settlement, use it, but don't depend on it. If you start getting attached, remind yourself, everything ends eventually, and the apocalypse doesn't take requests. In the end, survival isn't about being the strongest or the smartest. It's about being prepared. The second you stop adapting, the second you start believing you've won the apocalypse, you're already dead. So keep moving, keep watching, and never, ever let yourself think the worst is over. Because trust me, It's not. See you in the wasteland. If you've made it through this guide, congrats. You might just have a fighting chance. The world is brutal, factions are unstable, and your so-called allies are probably eyeing your rations. But you're still here, for now. That's more than most can say. The apocalypse isn't about fairness. It's not about justice, strength, or even intelligence. It's about knowing when to fight, when to run, and when to keep your mouth shut. The ones who survive aren't the strongest, the fastest, or even the smartest. They're the ones who understand that survival is a game, and the rules are always changing. If you can stay one step ahead, you just might live long enough to see the next disaster roll in. Just remember, no one is coming to save you. The old world is gone, and with it, all the conveniences and protections you once took for granted. You're on your own, or at least as alone as you choose to be. Factions will rise and fall. Betrayals will happen, and the only real constant is the fact that nothing ever stays the same. If you can accept that, if you can stay sharp and never let yourself get too comfortable, you might just make it. So what's next? That's up to you. Maybe you'll find a new crew. Maybe you'll carve out your own little slice of the wasteland. Or maybe you'll just keep moving, always staying ahead of the inevitable. Whatever you do it smart, do it fast, and most importantly, don't get sentimental. The apocalypse doesn't care about your feelings. Now get out there and don't die.